What we'll do, guys, is we'll make a start as we are now. So welcome everyone to the Honda Marine Sovereign Race 1 and 2, starting on Friday and Sunday. Thanks very much to Honda Marine for sponsoring. They'll be hosting a drinks reception at 4 p.m. on the Saturday. That's slightly different to the sailing instructions, but hopefully everybody got the update via email. Just so you know, as a jog member, you can get a Predict Win license with a 20% discount, and all the information you need is through the members benefits page on the jog website. So the weather, as I'm sure you've all seen, is going to be quite challenging, certainly for race 1. What we have is a high pressure system sitting over northwest Europe, and it seems to be particularly acute over the English Channel, and it's bringing very, very light and variable winds. So I'll just run the forecast forward. So it's starting about 8 o'clock, about an hour and a half before we'll start. And as you can see, throughout Friday, there's not a huge amount going on. The wind could be from the east over towards Dover, or it could be from the southwest, you know, near the Isle of Wight. I think it's very uncertain overall what the synoptic weather is going to do, which is obviously going to have a very big bearing on the wind we actually experience during the race. What should happen is into Saturday, the wind is hopefully going to fill in properly from the east. And if we're still racing on Saturday, which is a strong possibility, then we should have enough wind to get us finished. Wind-wise, if we look at the wind, so I'm just going to use the UK MO model rather than jump between a load of different models, but we'll just zoom in, have a closer look at the wind, and come back to Friday just before we start. So in this purpley patch here, it's basically a big pile of nothing, and there's perhaps a little bit more wind in the Solent than there is offshore. Sort of, this is approximately where the wind farm is on our route. And then throughout the day, you've got this interesting patch in the middle of the English Channel where some of the wind is coming from the southeast or the east, and then you've got proper southerly winds near the shore where we'll be in the afternoon. So I think it's really difficult to, you know, we can't route like we perhaps did for the NAB Tower races because the wind forecast just isn't reliable enough. So what we're going to be talking about today is more sort of what tactical decisions we're going to be making based on the wind and tide as we find it. Gusts, interestingly, some of the models are predicting gusts up to 14 knots, but generally those models are also predicting a steady 7-knot breeze as well, which the UKMO model isn't really predicting for most of the day. Moving on, it's going to be about 15 degrees air temperature, cloudy, I think, probably a bit like today if you're down in Hamble, where it's sort of light overcast cloud, but it's still quite bright as well. I think the cloud will dissipate as the day goes on.
Sorry, well, just one of the questions, will it be foggy? I think there might be something to start with. I think sort of talk to people who are down here first thing. I'm in Leamington, but it was quite foggy first thing this morning, but I think it will burn off quite quickly.
Just to recap, guys, if anybody wants to ask a question, if I've allowed you to speak, please feel free to crack on and ask a question. And you can also ask a question using the Q&A feature in the webinar. We'll just have a quick overview of the course. So with the start line, there is a possibility, based on what JOG have done historically, of having an alternative start line to the east. And feasibly, it could be inside or outside the Solent. So if everybody should probably, I suspect everybody's planning on having enough fuel to motor all the way to Eastbourne, but at least have enough fuel to be able to motor out the eastern end of the Solent so that you can get to the start line if it moves. Any updates on the start will come via the WhatsApp group or channel M1 37A on the VHF. But what we'll do is we'll talk about the routing as if we were starting on the normal start line. So as we know, start off the Gurnard buoy, leaving Snowdon to port. Sorry, yeah, leaving Snowdon to starboard. immediately I think you'll have some choices, because the tide is pretty much turning between 9:30 and 10 on the start line. So depending if you're class 3 or class 1, your decisions might be quite different, because class 3 should get some decent fair tide initially. Class 1 could be facing foul tide on the start line. I think Bramble Bank, particularly the more eastern end of Bramble Bank, might have quite a strong role to play if we're really struggling and it's super light coming straight off the start line, and then the tide's turning against us at about 10 o'clock. I'd be thinking about getting north over the bank. If it's maybe a bit stronger and and the angles perhaps allowing it, we may be able to sail. I think this is unlikely, but I'd consider it. Perhaps sailing to Sandfort on a rum line if it's possible, but you'd be wanting to make use of Ride Middle Bank to avoid some of the tide. Once we clear the Solent, just a navigational feature to point out, you have a deep water channel here. So this is for deep draft merchant vessels. And the rum line, which I doubt will be sailing, does go straight through the exit or entrance to the channel. So just keep an eye for any deep draft vessels. In terms of navigational features, you have shallow water both to the south of the rum line off the Isle of Wight and to the north. And I think Will's going to talk about how both of those feasibly could be used, if depending on weather conditions. Heading over towards ours, we've obviously got the Loo Bank here and Boulder Bank, so that can offer some tidal relief if it's foul tide as you're approaching it, and then obviously the deep waters to the south if it's a fair tide. Once you round ours, leaving it to port, you then have, if you sail the rum line, you're going to go straight through the wind farm. So it's perfectly safe to sail through the wind farm. There's the wind farm issues its own local notices to mariners, and they're happy for people to sail through it. The clearance on the mast blades is about 20 meters, so I doubt any jog boat is going to get near that. There's I think a 50-meter exclusion around each pillar, but the gap between pillars is just under half a mile, so there's plenty of room, although it doesn't particularly look like it on this chart, to get through the wind farm. However, I doubt you actually want to, if it's as light as we're thinking and it's from the southeast, I doubt anybody wants to sail through there because the wind will be quite poor. To the north of the wind farm, you've got shallow water. Potentially you can get right inside the 5-meter and the 2-meter contour. And obviously to the south, we've got the English Channel and the deeper water. Now, I think we're all going to spend, looking at the routing we've done so far, quite a lot of time looking at Beachy Head from this area of coast here. And so this area of coast here offers some good tidal relief if the tide's foul, but it's just bearing in mind, I haven't been able to find a really good tidal atlas for Beachy Head, but it seems inshore the tide is strongest, both when it's fair and foul. And you may want to think about giving it a bit of a wider berth if you're trying to get around it in foul tide. And then finally on the run-in, you've got shallow water obviously to your north, deeper water to the south. And just bear in mind at the finish, which I'll just zoom in. So we're finishing between the green can and the safe water mark there. One thing just to bear in mind, navigational hazard, there's this feature here, and I was slightly confused looking at it in Navionics. It's saying it's got 3-meter clearance, but equally it's saying it's a wash at low water. So I would give it a wide berth. What I'd like to do now is hand over to Will, and we're going to look at each leg in a bit more detail.
Okay, thank you very much. So sort of starting with the first leg out the Solent, it's as sort of was alluded to earlier, if we've got a pure easterly and it's a pure beat, my view would be, especially in the later starts, you want to be looking north to get out, especially given how light it's forecast to be, for 2 reasons. 1, so that you can get out the tide, and 2, you're in a position to anchor if you get some holes coming through. So I think one of the things to be aware of, making sure the kedge is actually accessible for when, if it really dies in the foul tide. So be heading north, sort of across in easterly, as we'll allude to. If it's really southeast, you might be able to run line to the forts. it's really variable depending on the conditions. I think the other thing, given how light it's forecast and the direction, you want to probably get away from the Isle of Wight for better wind and more pressure north. If there's any sort of southeast, and sort of try and get up there and clear, and especially off the line, I would expect there to be quite a lot of shelter and holes directly off Cowes, just north of, just sort of around Snowdon as you go past Cowes. So I think initial thoughts are probably go north, but given how fluky and up in the air the forecasts are, it'd be changeable, and just sail, sort of see where the pressure is, try and keep eyes down the course and try and sail to the pressure and think ahead and start and making sure that you're planning ahead. So if you go sort of, if the wind does die or the tide starts to turn, you've got far enough north in the pressure, or south if you want to go against the island to get at the tide. So once you sort of get to the forts, it's going to be quite interesting. I think if it's really light and the tide's properly against, there might almost be an argument to go right into Portsmouth, then come out and sort of pop round the fort and then go back in towards Chichester. Or if it's, depending on if it's taking us a very long time to get through the Solent, it might be in a position where it's starting to turn on the island side. And actually what you want to do is head south and sort of position yourself for the positive tide as it's starting to turn. So that's obviously taken, it's about 2:30, I think it starts to turn with. I don't actually have my tide book in front of me. So if you're sort of just, again, thinking down the course, but I think based on what I'm saying, my guess is going to be if we get out of the Solent in a reasonable time, you're going to want to head in towards Chichester to get out the tide and then start positioning yourself as you get towards Owers, probably with the tide starting to turn with, and then sort of starting to work your way south out into the channel. I think it's unlikely we'll be getting to Owers with tide against, just because of the timings of the day. So I think we should be getting tide, and we'll be pushing out to try and get into the more tide. I think the other thing, if we're early, start looking at sort of what you can hide behind the various features to try and get the tidal relief without overstanding the lay, because that's the risk. If the tide turns as you get to Owers or you're a mile short and you're due north of it and the tide turns with, there is a chance with the wind you'll be pushed past. So I think ley line calls from a distance are going to be a challenge coming into Owers on that. And then on the next leg, it's going to be, it really depends on timing. If you were at Owers just as the tide's turning with, my view would be to head out south, get into the stronger tide, hopefully get a little bit away from the land effects, maybe a little more pressure. It's a bit hard to tell. Some of the forecasts have it stronger in the north, some stronger in the south. But again, thinking 2-3 hours down the line, if the tide's going to turn in 2 hours, you probably don't want to be, well, you want to be heading in. You don't want to be 12, 20 miles offshore. You want to be heading in early. It's quite hard to work out what the wind effect and the wind shadow of the wind farm will be. The best sort of approximation, looking at some of the stuff I've got that I could think of, was to view it as a very tall tree. And if you look at the sort of guidance on that, you get the sort of wind effects 5 to 10 times the height downwind of a tree or other obstacle. So if you apply that to the wind farm, they're about 140 meters tall. So that could be 1,400 meters downwind. The wind could be a bit funny and still affected. Worst case, and especially if it's light and it's southeast, you want to I'd be putting a mile to just make sure you keep it clear. Then heading in, I think the other thing to bear in mind is just if you go for the offshore route, you're starting to get towards, you can just see on the bottom right of this chart, the shipping lanes and the traffic separation schemes. So keeping away from the ships especially if it's really light, you don't want to be stuck there. There are procedures for avoiding ships with the engine if it's really light. They're in the jog general conditions and things. So, but it's not the scenario we want to be in. So I would be making sure I stay north of the shipping lanes, because I have been east of the one off the Casquettes, and that's not fun experience and not where you want to be, and no wind. And then, as sort of Will alluded, as the tide turns again against sort of getting into the early evening, probably heading in towards the coast. And with the weather forecast, it's very variable, the times we're talking about here. We could be getting close to Beachy Head if we've got the sort of top end of some of the forecasts of the 8 knots. But I think that's highly unlikely. I think we're much more likely to be sort of round hours and heading in sort of, and then a long beat against the coast and against the tide, sorry, again, up the coast. But again, if it's more south than east, you might be able to have some options, and then there's going to be a really hard weighing up the extra distance sailed by sailing low versus the tidal benefit. So it's all a bit up in the air. And then I've actually never been around Beachy Head, I will admit, but as Will was saying, get some good tidal relief from what I can see sort of on the approach, and then going around the corner, it's the classic headland. It can be really strong around there. And then probably some form of reach to the finish. What I've sort of been looking at is sort of, I think the weather is so light and so fluky, you could have pretty much, there's chances of using pretty much every sail or light sail on the boat. So making sure everything is ready in case you get a mile or two of south and you want a reaching sail or a spinnaker to get going. As I said, having the anchor ready for the light pack if you get into proper holes and you're in negative tide. And I think the other thing to point out with both the wind farm and all the way through the Solent is there are lots of places with cables carrying very large quantities of electricity on the seabed. So before you drop the anchor, check where you're anchoring. Make sure you're not going to catch something you shouldn't. So with that, I'm going to pause. And Will, have you got anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think the only thing I'd add from a racing point of view is just sail the best you can in the conditions as you find them, because all this forecasting we're doing now, I doubt it's going to stand up to reality when we actually get out on the water. And I just look at the water, where's the best wind, and try and stay in it, and then just think about what effect the tide is going to have on you, whether fair or foul. Just a few highlights from the sailing instructions. So quick reminder, so there's drinks at 4 p.m. at the Sovereign Harbour Yacht Club, hosted by Honda Marine, who are the sponsors. So thanks to them. Don't forget to go through the ID gate before the start, showing your sail number and holding up your flare pack, checking all your flares are in date. Leading yachts to please text the race officer or call Jog 1 on VHF, channel M1 or 37A. Do take your own finishing time at the finish as well. The time limit is 23:59 on Saturday. Hopefully none of us are still out there at 23:59. If you do retire, please call the race officer on the mobile or VHF. It'll probably be mobile. If you can find the mobile number of the sailing instructions. So Sovereign Harbour has a lock, and before you need to call Sovereign Harbour on VHF channel 17 to get access through the lock. There is an option to race with Sovereign Harbour Yacht Club on Saturday. There's a warning signal at 09:45. All we have to do as Jog members just turn up on the start line, which is at the groin near the waterworks, which we may or may not be able to see on the chart. I suspect it will be much easier to see in reality than it is on the chart. And just call the race officer on channel 77, give in your sail number and how many crew on board, and then there's an entry fee collected back in the yacht club afterwards. They expect the racing to finish about 2:30. And don't forget to join the Jog WhatsApp group, because if there's a change to the start, that will be the easiest way to find out about it. Now, we had a question in the Q&A, I think.
It's just a thank you, I've answered that. I think, sorry, your comment about mobile phones reminded me of the other thing that's worth sort of pointing out is along the coast, there are quite a few useful weather stations so you can see what's happening. And as long as they're free to access, they are allowed. So if you're wondering what the wind is doing a mile or two up the course, I do recommend you it is worth keeping an eye on. And then also, as we've said, keeping eyes out the boat and looking for the pressure. Sorry, Will.
No problem. So we had a quick chat about the Sunday race back to Cowes. Given how uncertain the weather is for Friday, I think it's a bit of a punt to really make any predictions about Sunday. It does look like a southeasterly with more pressure than we're going to see tomorrow. And generally, the only thing I think we could really say at the moment is with the tide, try and maximise your tidal advantage by being offshore in the fair tide and inshore in the foul. And going downwind again, I think it's just a case of trying to avoid the wind farm. And if it is southeasterly on the run back into the Solent, do everything you can to stay out of Osborne Bay, because I doubt it will give you any advantage whatsoever. It's been my experience. Has anybody got any questions about anything so far? Please feel free to ask in the Q&A. Oh, Martin has raised his hand. Hi, Martin. You can.
If nobody's actually talking, just to let you know that we are nearly off Beachy Head. We've got about half an hour to go. We should be in Sovereign Harbour by 9:30 or so, ready to greet everybody tomorrow. I will be liaising with the officiating race officer tomorrow, Peter Charteris, early in the morning to see what we've actually got before we decide whether we're going to get you away from the standard line or move you down out of the Solent with a chance of getting some wind. So watch this space for that. Sovereign Harbour is very welcoming. They're all looking forward to seeing us down there. So whatever happens with the race, we're going to have a good party, chaps. And thanks very much to Will and Will for the weather briefing. That's me out.
Well, thank you for attending, everyone. Please feel free to go and enjoy the rest of your evening. Will and I will just hang about for a few minutes in case anyone got any questions, and we'll disappear shortly. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, Will and Will, just to say thanks. It's Kate and
All right,
Sam.
Kate. See you there.
No problem.
Thank you very much.
Have you got any Kate, have you got any tips?
No, I mean, I've run the routing on Expedition. Expedition just puts a dotty line and throws its hands up in horror. It's finish time, it says 8 o'clock tomorrow morning for me. Not tomorrow morning, Saturday morning.
Yeah.
But no, I think everything you've said, don't go downwind of a wind farm is a good tip. I saw boats do that on the North Sea race and just come to a stop, and then I managed to sail around them. I think that's about it, really.
Yeah,
I'm halfway down my gin and tonic, so.
I'll be coming to join you shortly.
Suppose you're only halfway through, Kate.
So no, that's it from Purple. Oh, de-weight your boat. I guess that's my other tip. But remember, it's Cat 3, so you need to have a heavy weather jib. It's a requirement, and all your flares and everything. But other than that, I would say try and take as minimum.
That's a good point. I mean, from a boat speed point of view, get weight out the stern, and keep you know, because you don't want to be dragging your stern around. Get weight forward would be my boat speed point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah, and on that weight forward, remember that you're not allowed to stack in racing, but you can put stuff where you want before the warning signal.
Yeah, so like if you want to put your fenders in the bow or something like that, you're allowed to.
Yeah, or your sails in the heavy weather sails in the forepeak.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'll drop off and hopefully see you all in Eastbourne on Saturday morning.
Yeah, hopefully see you there.
Thanks very much, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.